going to be going over, which we just barely got started last time. So let's review our objectives for Axis, this last Axis project. It is over there in Schoology, and we'll be submitting, basically continuing on what we've built on with Project 2. But what do we do with Axis with database maintenance? This is the most common thing you'll likely be doing. If you come across a database, you'll be hiring someone. Maybe if you really love databases, you might learn to do this yourself. If you remember or review this, you'll be able to do these kind of things. These are the kind of things that database people are regularly doing. Data entry people are doing this, of course, add, change, and delete records. That's your basic data entry job. And the forms that you create in the database make this an easier thing, a more friendly thing, and a safer way to do it using a form than just going right there into the table where you can mess up very easily. But that's not the only thing. Remember, the putting information into the database is then for later on searching and filtering. I consider filtering almost the same thing as searching. But then comes along someone says, you know, we've been keeping track of our veterinarians. We need to add something to that table. We want to update the design of that table. Or we want to change everybody's status, give them all an extra $10 to their account for some kind of promotion. You can write a query that updates everybody's balance by $10 with one query, updating records. Want to remove old records? You can use queries. These are dangerous queries. To delete things. Databases, you generally keep things around forever. Databases grow, so you have a backup before you ever run the delete query. As people are entering data in their data entry job, you can specify rules so they don't accidentally enter the wrong data. For example, putting in someone's address. Right now we have it set so they can't put more than a 2-letter state, but suppose we don't want them to put the wrong state in. They can't put a state that does not exist. You can actually specify rules about that so they can only put in valid states. You see that all the time when you're going and registering for something. You have to choose from a list rather than type in your state. And again, more updating of fields in the database so they could have single or multiple values. And then a very important thing, besides the formatting and the structure, column width and things, specifying referential integrity. This is super important, but it sounds rather confusing. We'll figure out what that is. Basically, we don't want records that don't have, like a pet that does not have an owner. That would be a problem. So referential integrity keeps that from happening, keeps you from having orphaned data. Playing with other data sheets, storing records, little extra things here in Axis Project 3. So let's get opening Axis Project 3, and we will begin modifying it. So I'm going to go to Axis, open Axis 3 that I just started. It has my queries from Part 2. Since I do have Part 2 around, I could go and delete all these queries, but I'm leaving them around just because they're not in my way. They do make my database slightly bigger, but it's not extra data, it's just a few information about queries. If I had tables that are full of a lot of data, that's when I might start deleting records that are old so my database doesn't get huge. And remember, whenever I'm in the database, anytime I want, I can click Compact and Repair just to make sure that things are in order, especially as it grows and things get slower. I can always run that. But let's go back and make a few changes here as we follow along in our textbook. As we maintain our database. One of the first things they're going to do is update some records. And they want to look at the veterinary vendors table. Well, I can always go right to my veterinary vendors table, open it up in here, and look at it right from the raw data sheet point of view. like an Excel spreadsheet. And that's perfectly fine. But for some people, this can be very dangerous. They can easily accidentally remove data or type in the wrong data. But it's a valid way to update and modify your data. I can delete records by clicking here and deleting. I can one by one, just like an Excel spreadsheet, go through, edit things in my database, in the table. But suppose I want to look at it a different way. I can close that. I don't need to look at the raw data, but I would like to edit it. Remember the 3-click method of creating a form, and they want to show you another way to create a form. I have the veterinary vendors table selected. I go over to create, and I'm going to do something fancy now. Over in the form, instead of the regular form that I could click and just get a plain form, over in more forms, I can choose a thing called a split form. Let's see what a split form looks like. Click on that. It creates a split form on the veterinary vendors table, basically giving you 2 views, a view of it as a form and a view of the raw data in the table. So I can see as I navigate my form that my record up here in a lovely user-friendly label and text is highlighted down here in the table format. So this is for the person that can't decide which do I like better, the table form or the friendly form. I can have both in the split form. So this is the split form view. I can navigate through my records down here just like I have a form, but also see what the data is looking like down in the table. And let's see if we're going to make any changes to this data. We go to our Duncan supplies. I can click down here. The form up here reflects that record. And let's see if we're making any changes to that Duncan. Oh, they go down. Let's see. They're going to go and they're going to add a new vendor. I think they're adding a new record. They're at new record. No, they had us click on it, but it looks like they're not actually not adding a record. We're just saving the form. Oh, now we're just saving a form, and yes, we're adding a record. Now, I could go here and click on this new record down here, or I can click down here in the arrow star that's called new blank form. It takes me down to that row, and now I can enter information for Global Pet Supply. I can either enter it here in datasheet view. I'm going to enter it over here in my form view, enter the ID as 6. Actually, I think that's auto number. Let's see if that auto numbers. Let's enter the vendor name is Global Pet Supply. Oh, I have to be in form view. There we go. Now I can edit that Global Pet Supply. It was in layout view. It's kind of irritating that it puts you in layout view instead of form view right away. That lets me edit it, and now I can enter the information. See how it's entering it down here as I enter it up here. It's like I can enter it in 2 locations, and you get to decide which is your favorite way to edit it. Western way. Tabbing takes me to my next field, Dallas, Texas. Feline leukemia vaccine. And quantity of 50. And there is one field not visible. The price of that is 5.75. 9.75. See how the cost has updated as I've entered it up here. I could edit in either place. And because I want to save this form, I'm going to close it, or I think since I haven't saved it yet, when I go to close it, it'll say, do I want to save it? Yes. And I'm going to give it the name. Let's see if they want a specific name for this form. I like going by the page number. Let's call it AC3-5 veterinary vendors. I'll put AC3-5 at the end of the name. AC3-5. So the form now is down here in my form section. It's a split form whenever I open it. Remember, that is just a way of viewing the data. Let's see how remember how we created that. I selected the table that I wanted to create a form for viewing, create, more forms, split form. That lets me quickly create a split form. It's so easy to create that often database people don't even save it. They just know that, hey, if I ever want to view the data in a split form, create split form. It's so easy to create. It's almost as easy to create one as it is to save and open it. I only worry about saving it is if I've made some design changes to it. Alright, so that's editing the data using the split form. Remember, you can always create a regular form by clicking the table that you want a form to view, create, and just form gives you the normal plain form like that. See how it's spread out a little bit more. It's not the most efficient way of using space. I mean, the entire width of the screen just for a two-letter state. And that's where in advanced classes you can actually go to layout view and edit the layout of your form. You're not going to have to worry about editing forms. You can just use them as Access creates them for you. So we can search for records. I'm going to skip that because that's later on. Say I want to update any contents. And I want to replace corporation with LLC in the Mays Supplies. Well, let's go to my vendors. Mays Supplies Corp. I can enlarge that field to see the whole name. Oh, and look, I even had a typo there. I can double click on that word and replace it with LLC. Just like an Excel spreadsheet, edit the data in the table. That's pretty straightforward. I'm saving the change in the width of those columns so I can read them better. Remember, what I'm doing here can be dangerous too, because if someone has an incorrect address accidentally entered, this editing in a table view, I could easily accidentally type on the wrong record and make a change, whereas the form forces you to go one record at a time very carefully. Now for something dangerous. We want to, we no longer work with Sanchez Supplies. Right click will delete that record. Now here's a problem. If I have some reference to Sanchez Supplies, like over here in my treatment cost table, notice here I'm not referring to veterinarians here. Here I am referring to a veterinarian by ID, but I'm not referring to who they work for. So it looks like no one is referring to Sanchez Supplies vendor. But just imagine if someone were in one of my tables, I was referring to someone, say the treatment or what, or a patient, or what vendor supplied that treatment, and Sanchez Supplies had been supplying that treatment for a treatment. If I remove Sanchez Supplies, anyone referring to who vendor 5 was has no information about that vendor anymore. That's called an orphan data. So this is a dangerous thing to do, but we know that we're safe to do this. So I'm going to right click, delete that record. And it gives me a warning because deleting records in databases means if anyone's referring to vendor number 5, that information is gone. But we are confident we're okay with that, so I delete it. Notice the ID number 5 is gone now. If I add a new record, it will continue counting up ID 789. ID 5 vendor no longer exists in our database. So deleting records is a dangerous thing. And this is why your database people are regularly backing up your database in case the wrong information gets deleted, because if it's deleted, you can't go back and get it. If you change something, there's a chance that you correct the change. They talk about filters. I'm going to skip the filtering part because that's just the same as searching for data. We're going to jump to the part about making changes to the data, to this design of our table. And this is where you will pay someone, and as they're explaining to you, you may have perhaps remember the things you did to change something in your database. What we want to do, the change that we want to make, is allow the quantity in our veterinary vendors table. We want to mess with the properties of the quantity in this table. Right now, quantity, we just see it as a number. It's an integer. There is no decimal after that. Perhaps someone can supply us with a quantity to the ½ ounce. Well, right now, quantity is only an integer. Let's adjust the structure of this table. And the way we do that, we go to Design View of the Veterinary Vendors table. So we have it open. I'm switching over to Design View. And here I see the quantity is a number. If I select that, select on quantity, I see it's a number, but what kind of a number is it? Well, it's a thing called a long integer. We would like that to be something that we could put a decimal point on. So we're going to change that from long integer by clicking the little down arrow here. I see my choices of numbers. Computers can store numbers in multiple formats. You don't have to memorize all the types of formats. Just know that computers can typically store as integers that count whole numbers, or decimal points we refer to as single precision floating point. The only thing that you need to worry about is single just means it's a number that can have a decimal point. How many decimal points it has, I can specify, and see if we're going to specify that. We're going to specify 2 places in the decimal point to keep track of this number. Now, it's not as friendly as the formatting in Excel, where you just increase or decrease decimal points. Here I have to go down to the properties of that number. So click on the number, change the field size to single precision, and they don't explain it over here. You'd have to look that up in the Microsoft help somewhere. But single just means it's single precision, capable of having decimal points. I could set the decimal points to 0, and it would be almost the same as a long integer. So decimal points to 2. Let's see if they want us to make any other changes. Yeah, that's the only change we're making. So quantity now can have decimal points in it. Now let's view datasheet view and see what that has done to us. Making that change, yes, I'm going to save the changes I just did. And let's now see what the data looks like. Well, it doesn't look any different here, but now, before I couldn't add a 0.5 to my number. I couldn't make any decimal. Here now, I could add a decimal quantity. So if someone gives me to the precision of ½ an ounce, I now can have that in quantity. Now we would also like to add more information in the columns of my veterinary vendors. So I'm going to go back to Design View, and I would like to add a column coming after veterinary supply. We want to know what type of product they are providing for us. And I want a column to come right after veterinary supply. Just like in Excel, I can right click, insert a row, and it will insert a row above the one I'm selecting. And now I have a row that I can add, and the new field, I'm going to call this product type. Product type. Adding a new type of field. By default, it wants to be short text, but we're going to do something else. We're going to make this a field, something that they can select from and have more control rather than them having to remember what are the valid product types as someone entering data. I can choose lookup wizard. That allows me to specify what they can choose from when entering data into this field. So to help control entering of data properly, not have the wrong product types added or designated, I can choose from a list of values. And I'm going to type the values that I want. I'm not going to choose them from a table. So I'm going to choose manually what values are allowed in this product type field. Clicking next. And now I can type one at a time the product types that they will be able to enter. It's going to be either VAC for vaccination, a MC, or SUP, microchip or supplement. I think that's what that stands for. Those will be the three types of available choices for what can be entered in product type. And now I click next. And I think we're just going to click next again. We're going to allow multiple values. We're not going to allow multiple values. And although I preferred it in the book, they don't ask us to limit to the list. That's something dangerous that I would prefer to check, but they tell us let's not limit it to the list and see how that works. And now finish. So I see a new field added, product type. It shows type short text, but now I see a little lookup tab, and I see down here that they can choose one of those things in that column. Don't worry about memorizing or learning all these options down here. Just remember we chose the lookup wizard and had it tell us, and then we entered what the valid product types would be. Now let's see the effect of that. I go to datasheet view, saving my changes. And now if I look here, every product now has a product type column. And when I go to click on it, look at that, it gives me the choice of one of those product types. So rather than me having to remember the product types, I can come through here and choose one of the three valid product types. Now remember how it didn't limit it to the list? I could type a product type, ABC, and it's going to be fine. Even though ABC is not a valid product type, because I did not limit it to the list, I can still type something in there, suppose some odd product type for a particular vendor. Otherwise, I can choose from the list. So anybody doing data entry, they see their choices. Now just for fun here, now that we made this change, let's see what the form would look like. Veterinary vendors, create form, and now let's view the form. See how under product type it has that little pull down now to show someone doing data entry. You have a choice here in the form. And I'm not going to save that form because I was just demonstrating what the form would look like. Back to veterinary vendors. There's that product type. I went and just randomly chose a product type. I'm probably wrong. It's vaccine. That should be vaccine here too. So let's change that to vaccine. Microchips, that would be MC. Surgical supplies, that would be SUP. And a vaccine. So I can choose what makes sense for product type. Now the only reason I would add this field is if in some other place product type becomes a very important characteristic of some search or some query, and I don't want to just see does it have VACC in the name, because look at that, someone doesn't type very well and they didn't spell vaccine correctly. We want a product type to specifically tell what that thing is in that table. Okay, so we've added a field. They would also like us to add a multi-valued field. And we're going to do this in the table we're going to do this in. We have multi-values. We're gonna add a multi-valued field in the appointments table. So veterinarian vendors table, I can't tell it's multi-value unless I look down here and I see this lookup thing. Otherwise, the best way to tell whether it's multi-value is you see the column, and here I see I have a choice. That's my indication that it's been designed with multi-value. They would like us to add a multi-value field in the appointments table. So close the vendors table, and now let's design the appointments table. Right click on the appointments table and design view. We would like to add a multi-valued field right above treatment number. So I go to treatment number, right click, insert row. And now I'm going to add a field called what do we have it called? What does he call it? We call it as, see what name. Well, he doesn't say what to call it. I guess I'm going to call it, let's see, the name should be service, I guess service type. Service type. It's going to be short text, but it's going to be a multi-valued field using the lookup wizard. Okay, so lookup wizard again on this one. We're going to type values that I want again. And this time we're going to do 2 columns. We're going to put a 2 in the column. And now here's the data we're going to enter for our service abbreviation. It's going to be listed here, T-1. The column 2 is going to be the description of it. It's going to be feline rabies. And then T-2. The service type there is dog wellness exam. And they give us a whole table. They give us, I don't know why they had to give us 14 service types, but they're wanting us to enter multiple fields. T-3 is cat wellness exam. T-4, dog rabies shot. I'm tabbing over. T-5 is feline vaccinations. T-6, canine vaccinations. T-7, canine heartworm. Let's see if it'll let me expand that while I'm typing it, just so I can see the full spelling. There we go. T-8. T-8 is feline heartworm. T-9. It's not doing any spell checking on this. T-11. Canine spay. Few more. Feline microchip. And T-14. Canine microchip. Showing that I can have 2 columns to make it helpful as they're choosing from these values. Enter them, and basically it's like I'm creating a mini little table inside of Access. I think I would have preferred to actually have this in a table and have it choose from what's in a table. This type in the values I want, I think it makes it a little more awkward if I want to make any changes to it or add an additional thing. The lookup wizard, once it's done, in order for me to fix it or add additional things or correct it, I have to know how to navigate this whole lookup table. So now that I have those records entered as multi-valued fields, with column 1 showing a type abbreviation, column 2 giving the description, watch what I can do now. I can click next, and the value that will be stored will be column 1. That's the type. The description will still be there. This time I'm going to leave that as service type. I'm going to limit it to the list, but I'm also going to allow multiple values. So we'll see how multiple values works compared to single value. So remember, whenever you're in a wizard, I can always go back, adjust things. Once I'm done, once I click finish, the wizard configures the lookup thing. If I ever want to do this again or make changes, I have to figure out how to navigate through this whole lookup thing, which is very confusing. So don't worry about knowing what the lookup wizard does. Let's see the effect of this now. Saving the table with that change in it. Now I have this extra field here, service type. Watch what happens when I click on service type. Now the multi-valued field lets me check what's happening in this particular appointment, and then I click OK after checking multiples, and what gets entered into that column are comma-separated values of the service type. So giving a little more complex possibilities here for when they have an appointment, what can be designated, stored as the plan for what's going to happen in that appointment. And the bottom line here is showing you that there's multiple ways to enter data. You can choose from a list or manually type it in if it's a date field or a time field. A date makes more sense. I have a calendar I could use because that's designated as a date type. Here, if it's just short text, it's up to me to figure out what to type there. And without referential integrity, I could type a non-existent veterinarian. So basically what we've done is we've added another lookup field just to give you practice at what can be done in modifying the structure of my tables, and then doing some practice data entry. Don't worry about needing to enter any specific service types. It's just showing you the possibilities. Ever go back to the appointments table? That service type is there. Go back to design. I see treatment number or service type is short text, but lookup shows me that, oh, it's more complicated than a normal short text. Now they would like to add a calculated field to automatically be calculated as I'm entering data. We did a calculated field on a query, but you can actually have data be calculated as you're entering information. So let's take a look back at the veterinary vendors table. Let's go back to design view. Right click design view on the veterinary vendors table. And we want to add, after the cost, a calculated field. It's going to be called total amount. Now we calculated this in a query, but we're going to actually set it up so total amount, instead of short text, we can make this be a calculated field. So I don't even have to have queries calculated. I could have the database do the calculation for me as data is entered or changed, just like a formula in Excel. So if I look at this calculated field, now let's see what calculation I want to do. I'm going to type in here, it's basically quantity times cost. Well, the quantity is a column, and all I put in here is, I'll put this in Notepad so it's more readable here for you. What I'm going to put in that square is this, calculated field. It's going to be this. What's in the quantity column with square brackets around it? The multiplication, which is the asterisk square bracket cost. That's what I'm going to be putting in that field. I'm just putting it here so it's easier to read. I'm going to put that right here in the expression builder. Quantity times cost. I click OK, and well, I see that down here in the expression. Let's see what happens if I go to datasheet view, saving my changes to the structure. And now over in that far column, look at that. It's doing the calculation for me. Because it's a calculated field. So I don't have to have a query anymore. I could just say, well, as I enter data, do that calculated field for me anytime I enter data. Just to see what happens if I change the quantity to 40. If I tab off of that or click off of that, see how that total amount got recalculated. Let's try Control Z. Sometimes Control Z works. There, yeah, a Control Z did work, and undos. Sometimes undos do not work. I think if you close it and open it, there's no more undo. So I adjusted the quantity. The calculated amount got immediately recalculated, just like an Excel spreadsheet would work if there's a calculation. So now I close that table. I have my queries from before. I have the design changes. But someone comes along and says, you know what, we would like to update all the vendors to be supplying, to just have a default supply of vaccination. Now we know that that's not what they all supply us, but I could come over here to the veterinarian's table, the vendors table, and I could say, you know, I know everyone is supplying us vaccines. Well, we know that that's not true, but suppose we want to just assign that on all of our vendors. Well, here there's only 2 to change. I could manually change it. But suppose I have 1,000 vendors that I want to update to be the product type of vaccination. How could I do that? Well, that's the power of the query. Queries can not only extract data from your database, they can update your database. So let's see how this can be done. I'm going to create a query using query design. The table that I care to do my query on is veterinary vendors. Double click. And now comes the field that I want to change. I want to change product type by double clicking product type. I add it to my query design. So far, if I do the datasheet view, I'm just going to see everybody's product type. All fine. But now watch what I can do. I can change this to an update query. And I can say update to. See how update to shows up now. If it's an update query, now I can put in here VAC. And if I run this query, what's going to happen is it's going to update all my product types to VAC. Well, I don't really want to update everything because I have already entered data. How about I put in the criteria that it is only updated if the field is blank. I put 2 quotes, empty quotes. That means only update if there's a blank in my product type. And just for fun here, let's go to my veterinary vendors table, and I'm going to blank out one of the product types. Let's blank out the feline leukemia. I'm going to blank out product type. Now watch what happens if I try to run this query. Oh, maybe I can't put. How about? I thought empty quotes would find that one. Uh-oh. Let me change that to a select query and see if I can find out. Which vendors? Oh, I need to show the vendor name. Let's see if here. Let's add the vendor name. No vendors have a blank product type. I thought empty quotes. Let's try is null. Ah, you can't use empty quotes. Is null is what determines whether something's there or not. So I put is null in the criteria, and I'm going to change that to an update query. This time, what this is saying is update anyone where there's a blank product type, update that one to VAC. This is a safer update query. It's only going to update those that don't already have something entered. If I did not have a criteria, it would change them all to VAC. Now, if I have the criteria is null, which is a nerdy way of saying it's blank, now when I click run or view, let's try the run. There we go. The run means I'm going to actually run this update, and watch what happens. It's going to update one row. Let's see what happened. I go to veterinary vendors table, and what do I see? I see that this one got updated to VAC. It made that one change. Watch what happens if I try to run this again in the query. If I run this query again, since I've already updated one, now when I run it, it says, oh, you're about to update 0 rows. Seems like a pretty silly message, but it's telling you how many rows will be affected by this query, and whether or not there's a 0 there, it's still going to warn you that there is no undo for this. So basically, this is a very powerful and dangerous query. I'm changing data. I've added the criteria so I don't automatically change everything. So update queries are dangerous. Again, have database backups before you let your database programmers make changes or run what they call mass updates. I always ask them, oh, before you do that mass update, do we have a backup of our database? Just in case something goes wrong, like they forget the criteria and change everything to VAC. Watch what happens if I do no criteria and I run this. It'll say you're about to update 5 rows. Oh, I don't want to do that. I can click no and come back and add the criteria is null. And run that again. Oh, there are no rows that don't have an entry in them. I can still run it, but I know I have not made any changes. So let's save this query, Control S. Let's call this update blank product type. Having a criteria on the update query is super important. Otherwise, you are tromping across your entire database, changing every product type to VAC when that's likely not the correct answer. If you want to say update to VAC where we haven't entered it yet, it may still be wrong, but it's only updating those that have a blank product type. And if I close this and I see my query, notice it has the exclamation point. This is a update query. Now that the dangerous things about update queries, if I double click on it, it's going to run the query. It wants to run the query right away. So whenever you see that, I want to right click, view the design before I run it. I want to know what that query is going to do, and I can sort of understand it by looking at design view, that it's going to update the product type field to VAC when that field is blank or is null. So that's the danger, that's the power of update queries. They can do a mass update. Now I can delete things as well using a delete query. We're not gonna make a delete query, but we are going to add a validation rule, and we're going to adjust a field size. Let's go to our veterinary vendors table again, and now we're going to make some more changes in the design of this. Right click, design view, And the existing fields, I can make some modifications to them. Let's see what I can do. I can look at the zip code field. Right now I see the zip code field is allowing 255 characters. Well, that's a ridiculous size for a zip code, but zip codes could possibly be longer than the 5. Let's allow up to 20 characters in the zip code. Make that a field size of 20. And let's suppose in the name field, if I click on the name field, its properties will show up down there. We want that field to be required. We don't want an unknown name for a vendor. And so I can put down here, change required from no. I can double click to toggle to yes, or choose a pull down and choose yes. That means they can't leave the vendor name blank. Doesn't keep them from typing in the wrong name or only typing in one letter, but at least it forces that something to be put there. Now, better yet would be some validation text that makes sure that it doesn't have some crazy format. So, but we did make it a required field. Now, the way I'll see the effect of that, saving my table, ignoring the warnings. Now suppose I try to enter new data. Let's say an address 123, city, Dubuque. If I try to leave that record, it'll say, sorry, you can't complete entering that until you enter a name in the vendor name field, because I made it a required field. So it's kind of irritating because that's required. I can't go anywhere else. I can type in other fields in that same record, but I can't leave that record until I type something, Manning Vets. Then it will let me leave that field. And now I could say, well, I didn't really want that. I could delete that. But it won't let me enter a record without having a name, because Design View said vendor name is a required field. We can also, in the quantity, specify that that can't be negative. So how would I do that? Well, I put in the validation rule a little mathematical formula that looks like this. Validation rule is going to look like this. It's greater than 0, and the word and, less than or equal to 1,000. That's what I put in my validation rule right here. So they don't enter a negative number in quantity. They don't enter a 0 in quantity, because that wouldn't make sense either. And in order to not have a very unfriendly message, we put in validation text, please type, or please enter a positive number less than, or let's make it 1,000 or less. 1,000 or less. Rather than say less than or equal to 1,000, I like 1,000 or less. And the word please. So now, when I go to enter data, and I go to enter a quantity, let's try enter a negative 50. It says, oh, please enter a positive number, 1,000 or less. It doesn't undo it for me. I have to do Control Z to undo it. If I try to enter 5,000, I'll get that same message. And it won't let me leave that record until I fix it so the validation rule does not fail. Control Z is an easy way to go back to the previous number. We'll stop there, and we'll continue our database modification next time. I will upload this recording in case you need to review. Making changes to the structure of our database. Something you'll be paying a database consultant for, but you'll now have a clue of what they're charging you for. and have a wonderful day.